They fired her in less than 60 seconds, right in front of the coffee machine she thought only real guests deserved to use. The footage hit social media before lunch. Sandra Blake, pristine in her navy blue blazer, her nameplate still pinned with pathetic authority, frozen mid-blink as the man in the charcoal suit stood inches from her, voice as quiet as a knife. Who told her she wasn't elegant enough to sit here? The air in the VIP lounge turned colder than the untouched champagne flutes on the glass bar. Around them, staff stiffened. No one spoke. One intern accidentally dropped a napkin and didn't dare pick it up. Sandra's lips parted, trembling. We didn't know she was... But the man didn't flinch. She didn't ask you to know. She asked for a seat. That was all it took. He tapped something into his phone, calmly, precisely, and 20 seconds later, the LED wall behind the reception desk flickered. Staff notice, S. Blake, suspended immediately, further review pending. Phones buzzed, eyes darted, and near the window, the woman at the center of it all, silent, solitary, dressed like a tourist at the wrong terminal, lifted her to-go cup, took one last sip, and walked away. She never turned back. She didn't need to. The message was already clear, carved into the polished floor with every echo of her footsteps. And it had all started with a voice so gentle it could have been ignored, if only someone had listened. "Excuse me," she'd said. "Would it be all right if I waited here for my flight?" She walked in just past 11, right when the morning rush had fizzled and the room slipped into that sterile hush only luxury spaces know, where even silence feels expensive. The lights above gleamed like chilled champagne, casting soft reflections off the marble floor as she moved with quiet purpose, the heels of her worn boots clicking softly but confidently. Her coat was long, neutral, slightly wrinkled at the hem, the kind that said function over fashion. Her hair was tied back in a practical bun, no makeup, no jewelry, no entourage. Just her, a black leather carry-on at her side, and a calm that somehow unsettled everyone without her saying a word. The receptionist glanced up from behind the desk and hesitated, already reaching for a default smile, the kind reserved for confused economy passengers who had wandered too far. But before she could speak, someone else appeared, Sandra Blake, head of guest relations, heels sharp, lipstick sharper, with the air of someone who had sent back more lattes than she'd ever finished. She didn't raise her voice, didn't frown. Instead, she smiled the way people do when they're about to remind you of your place. "Ma'am, this lounge is for Priority Circle members only," she said sweetly. "If you're looking for the main terminal, it's just 2 floors down." Ava didn't flinch. She didn't protest or explain. She simply reached into her coat, pulled out a black card with no logo, no name, just a matte finish and a thin silver chip, and held it out with 2 fingers. Sandra barely looked at it. She tilted her head, lips tightening, and with a practiced laugh said, "We see all kinds of cards here, dear. This one doesn't match any of our systems. You'll need to wait elsewhere." Ava paused, not in confusion, not in anger. She just paused, as if studying the shape of the moment, how it curled around the edges of arrogance. She put the card back in her wallet, nodded once, and walked toward the far window without another word. Sandra turned sharply, muttering something to the receptionist, who offered a nervous chuckle. The other staff watched but said nothing, trained to defer to senior tone over actual sense. As Ava sat near the window, alone, her reflection in the glass seemed to vanish into the skyline beyond. She didn't check her phone. She didn't adjust her coat. She simply waited, eyes steady, posture composed, the way someone waits when they've learned the weight of silence. A flight attendant passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, hesitated, then skipped her entirely. One guest raised a brow, whispered something behind a napkin, and Sandra, now overseeing a new arrival, didn't glance her way again. But Ava wasn't there to be seen, not yet. Not until she had a reason. And when it came, she'd only need one line, one gesture. For now, she just watched, listened, and waited. Because sometimes power doesn't walk in with noise. Sometimes it sits quietly by the window. Sandra reappeared 10 minutes later, walking like someone who knew she was being watched and wanted it that way. She held a clipboard she didn't need and smiled like she'd just won something invisible. Her heels clicked louder this time, her eyes sharp as glass. And when she passed Ava's seat again, she slowed, not enough to stop, just enough to let her words hang midair like perfume. "Sometimes people get confused," she said, voice honeyed but thin. "It's easy to mistake this space for something more familiar. But this lounge is curated. It's not just about flying first class, it's about knowing how to belong." A few nearby guests chuckled, not loud, just enough to be heard. The man in the tailored tan suit lowered his paper, gave Ava a once-over, then raised his eyebrows and returned to his reading. A couple sipping espresso exchanged looks, she in Chanel, he in cufflinks shaped like jet engines, and their silence said more than any word. The staff behind the bar didn't look up. The attendant who'd been folding napkins paused, then continued folding, hands moving faster now. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She simply reached into her coat, pulled out her phone, and typed a single line. No emotion in her face, no tension in her shoulders, just the kind of stillness that comes from years of watching people underestimate her. The message read, "Can you swing by the company lounge for a moment?" Then she hit send. No punctuation, no urgency. Just the quiet weight of certainty. Sandra was already walking back toward the front, talking to another guest in French, her voice bright with the energy of someone playing hostess at a gala. Behind her, whispers were starting. The woman near the coffee bar tilted her head and whispered something into her husband's ear. A teenager scrolling TikTok nearby glanced up, then did a double take. "Is she lost?" he murmured. His mother shushed him, but she was staring too. Ava kept her gaze on the skyline, unmoved. Her bag sat next to her, untouched, polished leather against velvet seating. Her posture didn't change when two more staff members walked past without acknowledgement. One of them made a vague gesture toward her seat, a slight roll of the eyes, a smirk exchanged between coworkers. No one offered her a drink. No one asked if she needed anything. Because in that room, service was a performance, and Ava hadn't been cast. Sandra returned again, this time with a different smile, the kind you wear when you know the cameras are rolling. "We do hope you're comfortable," she said, voice light, sweet with condescension. "Though, if you need assistance locating a more appropriate waiting area, we'd be happy to direct you." Ava looked at her, not long, not hard, just enough for silence to press between them. Then she nodded once, like someone agreeing to terms they didn't request. She said nothing. Her fingers tapped once on the leather handle of her carry-on, then rested. Sandra gave a tight smile and turned away. And that was when the shift began, subtle at first. The receptionist behind the desk glanced at something on her screen, frowned slightly, and leaned toward a colleague. A guest near the fireplace adjusted in his seat, studying Ava's reflection in the glass. The bar attendant who hadn't offered her a drink now seemed to avoid her altogether, eyes darting past her seat with forced precision. In the air, something changed, like pressure before a storm, and still Ava said nothing. Did nothing, just waited. Her message had been sent. Her expression hadn't changed, but around her, the room had started to tilt. Sandra, oblivious, resumed her slow orbit around the lounge, checking nothing, solving nothing, merely existing in her own performance. And Ava, seated by the window like scenery no one had ordered, remained exactly where she was. Not defiant, not defensive, just unshaken. That's what made it unbearable, because people like Sandra didn't know what to do with silence that wasn't submission. They only recognized fear, apology, compliance. But Ava gave them none of it, and the absence of those things was louder than any outburst. It was quiet, and it was deadly, and it had just begun. Then came the sound, not loud, just a single chime. Ava's phone lit up once, a short message flashing across the screen, and whatever it said, it didn't show on her face. But her eyes shifted slightly just once toward the front entrance. That was all. She didn't rise, she didn't signal, she simply crossed one leg over the other, leaned back, and waited. The kind of wait that makes people nervous when they don't know why. A junior attendant standing by the beverage counter dropped a glass, barely audible, but enough for every head to turn. Sandra snapped her fingers, annoyed, but her focus wavered. Something was off. She glanced toward Ava again, but this time with the twitch of someone unsure. And in rooms like this, uncertainty spreads faster than spilled champagne. It was the youngest of the flight staff who noticed it first, a kid barely out of training with a name tag that still looked fresh from the printer and shoes too new to trust. Standing near the edge of the bar with a tray of sparkling water, he wasn't sure where to set down. He hadn't said a word since clocking in, hadn't even made eye contact with most of the VIPs, but he saw the bag. Not the brand, though it was beautiful in a way that whispered wealth without shouting it, but the emblem stitched into the leather, small, subtle, the kind of detail that only meant something if you knew exactly what you were looking at. And he did. His supervisor had shown him that symbol once during onboarding, pointed to a photo pinned in the training manual and said, "You see this? This means founder level. You treat anyone carrying that like they're the one signing your paycheck." The boy blinked, shifted his weight, and stared a little longer, then slowly began to realize the woman sitting alone by the window wasn't just another underdressed traveler. She wasn't under anything. She was beyond. Across the room, a man in his late 60s folded his newspaper with deliberate care, the way only men who've made too many deals and lost too few do, and leaned slightly toward the woman seated beside him. He wasn't the type to speak unless it mattered, but his voice carried anyway, low and curious. "That woman over there," he said, nodding subtly in Ava's direction. "I think I saw her at the Genesis launch 2 years ago. LA Private Airfield. She stood next to one of the designers during the press photos." The woman beside him frowned, glanced at Ava, then at Sandra, and said nothing. But her hand moved, slowly lifting her phone as if to check the time, though her eyes never left the figure by the window. The temperature in the lounge seemed to dip. Conversation softened. Eyes shifted. Someone coughed, someone else silenced a ringtone too late. The tension wasn't loud yet, but it was growing, the way water rises before it spills over. The young flight attendant set his tray down, wiped his hands on his apron, and crossed the room with more hesitation than confidence. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. All he knew was that he couldn't keep pretending she wasn't there. He stopped a few steps from Ava's chair and opened his mouth to speak, but her eyes met his and held there, calm, unbothered, as if to say not yet. He closed his mouth, nodded slightly, and walked away. No one else saw the exchange, or if they did, they didn't understand it. But he did. He knew something was wrong. No one sits that still unless they're used to waiting for people to realize they've made a mistake. In the far corner, a woman in a gray suit, someone from legal, maybe, or PR, was now quietly speaking into a headset, one hand shielding her mouth, her eyes darting toward Ava every few seconds. She looked like someone trying to confirm something she hoped wasn't true. Meanwhile, Sandra continued her performance, guiding a couple toward the champagne bar, laughing too loudly at a joke she clearly didn't hear, throwing glances over her shoulder like confetti. She hadn't noticed the shift yet, but everyone else had. A man near the fireplace quietly asked for the Wi-Fi, then used it to look up the Genesis board of directors. 2 seats down, someone else typed "Founder Black Card Aviation" into a search bar and hit enter. A silence was building, not the polite kind, but the brittle kind, like glass under pressure. And Ava just sat there, hands folded, posture relaxed, eyes on the glass wall beyond, where the tarmac stretched out like a runway into another life. Her phone vibrated once, briefly, but she didn't check it. She didn't need to. The waiting was almost over. Someone behind the reception desk finally stood, walked to the back room, and returned with a folder marked internal clearance. It wasn't protocol. It was instinct. That kind of folder only came out when someone wasn't who they were supposed to be, or exactly who they were supposed to be, and no one had noticed. The young flight attendant returned to his post, but this time, his eyes never left Ava. The man by the fireplace refreshed his search results. The woman with the headset stepped away from the window and started walking, slowly, toward Sandra. And still, Ava didn't move. Her presence alone had turned the room inside out, exposed every flaw in its routine, pulled the thread that unraveled the illusion. No anger, no drama, just stillness, quiet and deliberate, like the moment before a verdict is read. And though no one had said it yet, the message was already echoing between the marble floors and designer furniture. Someone important had just been humiliated in front of an audience trained not to blink, and everyone was starting to realize it. The receptionist, who had earlier dismissed Ava with a rehearsed smile, now stared at her computer screen as if it might offer absolution. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, then tapped a few keys before pulling up a profile she clearly hadn't meant to overlook. Her face went pale. She leaned toward a coworker and whispered something urgent, eyes wide, lips tight. The coworker nodded and stood, moving toward the manager's office with a kind of speed disguised as calm. Across the room, Sandra finally sensed it. The quiet wasn't admiration, it was recoil. She turned toward the window, her smile faltering just enough to betray her confusion. Then dread. Something had changed, and she was no longer in control of it. The door to the lounge opened with a soft hiss, not loud, not rushed, but sharp enough to cut through the silence like a scalpel. Every head turned. Even Sandra stopped mid-sentence, her voice trailing off into a breath that never made it out. The man who entered didn't look around. He didn't need to. His steps were steady, polished shoes striking the marble floor, with a rhythm that didn't ask for permission. Tall, dressed in a dark charcoal suit, black tie, coat folded over one arm. He carried the kind of authority that didn't rely on introductions. People just knew. His hair was silver at the temples, neatly combed, skin slightly weathered, not old but seasoned, like someone who had spent enough years at the table to know when to flip it. His presence was immediate, unsettling, the kind that straightens backs and shortens breaths. He walked past the reception desk without slowing, his gaze locked on Sandra, who now stood rigid like a mannequin with a hairline fracture. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of her, close enough to command, far enough to accuse. Then he spoke. His voice was low, steady, and razor-sharp. "Who?" he asked. "Told Mrs. Collins she wasn't allowed to be served?" The room froze. You could hear the air conditioning hum. A spoon clinked faintly in a coffee cup across the room. Sandra blinked, lips parting like she might form a word. But nothing came out. Her throat bobbed. Her clipboard shifted slightly in her grip, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The receptionist took an unconscious step back. The young flight attendant who'd recognized the bag stood motionless, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Sandra finally spoke, voice brittle, stretched thin. We didn't know who she was," she said, almost whispering. The man didn't blink. She didn't ask to be known. She asked for a seat. He turned slightly then, not dramatically, just enough to sweep the room, with a glance that seemed to inventory every face. When his eyes landed on Ava, he paused. She hadn't moved. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just looked back at him with the same quiet composure that had unraveled the whole building. He looked back at Sandra and continued. "Ms. Ava Collins is not just a member," he said, voice rising barely half a note. "She is a co-founder of this airline. She was on the tarmac when the first test flight took off. She sat at the table when this lounge was designed. She wrote the first policy manual you people pretend to enforce." A gasp, not loud but real, from someone near the bar, and then silence again. "And today," he said, stepping closer to Sandra, "she declined a $40 million partnership offer because of what happened here, because of how you made her feel." Sandra shook her head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream. "I didn't mean to," she began, but the man cut her off with a raise of his hand. "You didn't need to," he said, and turned to the receptionist. Internal channel, full visibility. The woman behind the desk looked like she'd seen a ghost. She nodded once, quickly, and began typing. 10 seconds later, every screen on the wall lit up, switching from flight data to a red banner that read, "Staff Notice, Immediate Termination, S. Blake, Code 4, Conduct Violation, Effective Now." Sandra turned slowly, her mouth open, eyes wide, like the words were happening to someone else. "Wait, no, please. There's been a mistake. I didn't know. I was just following." The man didn't even look at her again. "Pack your things," he said calmly. "Security will escort you out in 5 minutes." A uniformed guard, who had until now blended into a corner like hotel wallpaper, stepped forward. Sandra looked around, desperate, but no one moved. No one spoke. Not one colleague stepped in, because now they all understood. Every half-smirk, every rolled eye, every unspoken judgment that had passed between them that morning had just been turned inside out. The woman they ignored had just cost someone their career and made a decision that would ripple through boardrooms for months. Sandra's breath hitched. Her clipboard hit the floor. Papers scattered. No one bent to pick them up. The man turned again, walked past Ava without breaking stride, and stopped just behind her seat. She stood then, slowly, elegantly, like someone who understood gravity on her own terms. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded once. No words. She picked up her bag, the one with the emblem no one had recognized, and together they walked out of the lounge without looking back. The glass doors closed behind them with a hiss. Inside, the silence cracked. One man near the fireplace stood up and adjusted his coat, as if remembering how to breathe. Another guest closed her laptop, suddenly self-conscious. A woman near the counter whispered to her husband, "Did you hear that?" Co-founder. Phones began buzzing. News traveled faster than elevators. Someone already had the clip posted. 10 seconds, 20 likes, then 100. Staff members huddled behind the counter, unsure what came next. The young flight attendant looked down at the tray he'd abandoned, then straightened his shoulders and walked over to pick it up. His face was flushed, but his jaw was set. The receptionist swallowed hard and began typing again. Everyone was moving, but no one knew where to go, because the center of the room, the quiet woman by the window, was gone, and with her went the illusion that kindness was optional, or that power always wore a label. Outside the glass wall, a private jet lifted gently from the runway, the company logo catching the light just right. Ava Collins didn't wave, didn't post, didn't gloat. She simply disappeared back into the sky. But her absence filled the room like thunder. And the memory of that morning, of the question that shattered a career and reminded a company who it truly served, would echo in that lounge long after the next guest ordered their drink. Moments after the doors closed behind her, the murmurs began. At first, just whispers, fragmented and cautious, but then louder, more animated, like a current no one could stop once it started. "Did you see her face?" someone said near the fireplace. "She didn't even flinch." Another chimed in. "That was her, right? The one who funded the Seattle hub after the merger?" And then came the phones, flashes of the moment, screen recordings of the red banner, screenshots of the termination notice already flooding private chats and Slack threads. Employees across terminals were pinging each other. "You heard what happened in Lounge 4? Someone just got canned in front of guests, founder-level violation." A staff manager from a nearby gate came sprinting down the corridor, eyes wild, asking to review camera footage. The receptionist just pointed at the screen, mouth tight, hands still trembling. She knew it was too late. 10 minutes later, it was trending on internal social platforms. Someone had already clipped the exact second the man said, "She didn't ask to be known. She asked for a seat." 1,000 employees reshared it with captions like, "Lesson learned" and "Check your bias at the door." In the operations room, senior leadership was silent, watching the clip on a loop. One VP said nothing for a full minute, then closed his laptop and muttered, "She warned us about culture drift last quarter." And while the company scrambled to control the narrative, no one could control what mattered most. People talking, not just about what happened, but about why it happened, and who they might have overlooked themselves. Because stories like this don't end in a lounge. They start there. They start every time someone chooses to see status over substance. And this time, substance had a name. Ava Collins. The private doors to Lounge 4 shut behind Ava Collins and the man who walked in like a scalpel and walked out like a verdict. Yet no one in the room moved. It was like they were still processing what had just happened, rewinding the last 30 minutes in their heads and realizing frame by frame how wrong they had been. The weight of their assumptions, the ease with which they dismissed her, now felt radioactive. People stared at their drinks like they held answers. Others pretended to check emails that weren't there. The silence wasn't reverent. It was regret, thick and dry and hanging in the air like smoke from a match that had lit the fuse. Then Ava's voice broke through, soft, steady, grounded. She had paused on the other side of the glass, turned slightly, not toward Sandra, not toward management, but toward the youngest staff member in the room, the one who had seen the symbol on her bag and said nothing, who had noticed before anyone else that the woman sitting quietly by the window didn't belong in their assumptions. She looked at him and said, "Thank you for trusting your eyes more than a uniform." Then she turned away again, and this time for good. The boy didn't say anything. His face turned red, hands unsure of what to do. But the way his shoulders squared told the story anyway. A guest nearby, a woman in a tailored dress and diamond earrings, exhaled hard, like she'd been holding her breath. She leaned toward her husband and whispered, "From now on, I'm done judging people by labels." That woman owned the room without even raising her voice. Her husband nodded. In the hours that followed, what happened in Lounge 4 didn't stay in Lounge 4. A staff member posted a vague but pointed update to the company's internal network. "This morning, I learned that kindness isn't just professional, it's protective. We serve stories we haven't read yet. Within minutes, it was reshared by team leads, gate agents, corporate reps, and board members. Another post went up later, just a photo of the red termination banner on the screen, captioned, "One condescending glance, one career erased." That one exploded. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. All told the same truth. This wasn't about a mistake. It was about a mirror. The press caught wind of it. A journalist waiting in the next terminal overheard a whisper from an operations officer, checked a few internal feeds, then fired off a tweet. Founder of major airline declines multi-million-dollar deal over treatment in her own lounge. One staffer fired. Internal reckoning underway. It went viral in under an hour. News outlets picked it up before lunch. The headline on most of them was some variation of, "One seat denied, one empire shaken." Comment sections exploded with personal stories. People talked about the times they were dismissed, overlooked, judged. Gate agents, engineers, nurses, veterans, mothers. Everyone had a version. Everyone had felt invisible in a room they should have belonged to. And Ava's silence had given them a voice. Back in the lounge, Sandra was gone, escorted out without ceremony, her badge deactivated, her clipboard a cautionary tale. Her name was scrubbed from the staff directory. A new manager was sent by corporate within the hour. Her first words were not policy, they were apology. "If you were made to feel less than human today, we failed you. That won't happen again." She offered coffee refills. She called each staff member by name. She didn't ask Ava to return. She knew better than to pretend the damage could be undone. The young flight attendant stayed late, not because he was told to, but because something inside him shifted. He refolded napkins like they meant something, cleared glasses before they clinked too long on tables, looked people in the eye when he greeted them. He wasn't just a server anymore. He was a witness. One guest approached him on her way out. "That woman," she said, gesturing toward the window where Ava had been. "What was her name again?" He paused, smiled just a little, and said, "The one who built the place? Her name's Ava Collins." The woman nodded. "She didn't say much." "She didn't have to," he replied. Far beyond the terminal, Ava's jet cut through the clouds like a quiet answer. No interviews, no press statements. She didn't need the spotlight. Her message had already landed. People across the country were quoting her, or rather, quoting the moment. "Excuse me, would it be all right if I waited here for my flight?" A sentence so ordinary it should have disappeared the moment it was spoken, now engraved in every HR training slide, onboarding video, and employee manual being rewritten before the end of the week. They printed the sentence on posters, hung them in back rooms. It became more than a line. It became a reminder. That power doesn't always show up loud. That kindness is never beneath the dress code. And that sometimes, the quietest woman in the room is the one who owns the whole damn building. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. A few months back, Sandra was holding one of her coaching moments near the staff lockers, telling a new hire how to spot the real VIPs. "Look at the bags," she said, like it was gospel. "Leather, labels, stitching. That's how you know who matters." I remember thinking it felt off, but who was I to argue? I just cleaned the floors. No badge, no clipboard. Just keys and gloves and a mop I've used longer than half the team's been alive. But I saw her that morning, the woman by the window. I saw the way she watched people. Not just stared, but watched. Like she'd been on the other side of every one of their glances before. No flash, no noise, just presence. I've cleaned that lounge for 6 years. I've seen actors, billionaires, senators. Most want to be seen. This one didn't. And yet, she's the one they'll never forget. After she left, people walked quieter, talked softer. Even the guests started saying thank you more. Not because someone told them to, because someone reminded them how. There's a funny kind of justice in that. Quiet but permanent. Sandra's gone. So is her clipboard. But that woman's sentence, the one about waiting for her flight, it's framed now, right next to the back door where we clock in. Someone taped a sticky note under it that says, "Look beyond the surface." And every time I see it, I think about what changed that day. Not just policies, people. So here's my question. You ever been judged by how you looked? Ever seen a room shift because someone finally saw what mattered? Tell that story. We need more of them, because the smallest voices often hold the loudest truths. And sometimes the janitor sees it before anyone else does.